Hello, my name is Adelise. I was 8 months pregnant when my husband pulled the car over, looked me dead in the eye, and told me to get out, on a dark road, in the middle of nowhere. He left me there, alone, in labor. But it didn't start that night. It started long before, when my mother-in-law accused me of stealing her $14,000 bracelet, and my sister-in-law backed her up with a smile. When my husband stopped calling me his wife, and started calling me a problem. They erased me from photos, from family dinners, from everything, piece by piece. And the scariest part? I still believed they loved me. Why would a family go to such lengths to break someone who only ever tried to belong? Would you have seen it coming? If it were you? It was early spring in Spokane, the kind of evening that teased warmth but still carried a bite in the wind. The Carter house glowed from the inside out, warm yellow light spilling through tall windows onto the carefully trimmed lawn. Inside, I stood barefoot in their kitchen, sleeves rolled up, arranging hors d'oeuvres on antique porcelain platters I'd been told not to break. Vera's birthday dinner wasn't just a family affair, it was a social event. She called it a small gathering, but we all knew what that meant. Half the neighborhood, a few influential members of her charity board, and the local pastor were on the guest list. I'd spent all afternoon cooking and setting the table while Callista, my sister-in-law, had been upstairs curling her hair and live-streaming her makeup tutorial. I didn't complain, not out loud, but each step between the stove and the dining room chipped away at something I couldn't name yet. Still, I reminded myself why I was doing this. I was married to Corbin. I was part of this family. Or at least, I was supposed to be. By the time the doorbell rang, the appetizers were ready, the table was set, and I had retreated to the edge of the kitchen. Vera entered the foyer, radiant in a navy blue dress and pearls that shimmered under the chandelier. She air-kissed her guests, laughing that polished laugh she used for people she didn't really like. Then came the moment, the one that still stings, even now. "Callista's just come back from New York," Vera announced to a group of women sipping wine. "She's our family's star, always so stylish, so composed, and this is our helper for the evening." I froze. "Our helper," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Not my daughter-in-law. Not Adelise. Just helper." Callista waved, amused. She was wearing my perfume, the one I kept on the bathroom shelf I used to share with Corbin. "She makes killer canapes, though," she added, laughing. I smiled, tight, practiced. The kind of smile women wear when they've been slapped with words. No one questioned it. No one asked who I was. Throughout dinner, I moved like a shadow. Guests praised Vera's decorating sense, complimented the flowers Callista had ordered from a high-end florist, and asked if Corbin had taken over yet at the firm. I passed wine, cleared dishes. Every polite smile I forced felt like it cost me a piece of myself. Later, I heard one of the board members whisper to another, "Who's she again?" "I think she married Corbin," someone answered. "Not sure, she's quiet." Corbin showed up midway through the evening. When our eyes met across the room, I mouthed, "I'm done." I expected a nod of thanks, maybe a smile. He gave me neither, just a glance, then turned back to his conversation. That was the first cut of the night. The second came later. Guests trickled out around 10. I began cleaning the kitchen, my back aching from standing on the tile floor all day. Callista was upstairs, Vera was in the living room finishing a glass of wine, and Corbin had disappeared somewhere. I didn't care where. I was wiping down the counter when Vera's voice sliced through the silence. "It's gone." I turned. She stood in the hallway, pale and rigid. "What is?" I asked, heart already thudding. "My bracelet, my grandmother's bracelet, $14,000. It was on my dresser this morning." Callista appeared, arms folded across her designer cardigan. "You were the only one upstairs," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just flat, matter-of-fact. I blinked. "What? No, I've been in the kitchen. I haven't touched—" "You've been struggling lately, haven't you?" Vera interrupted. "Starting that little baking thing online? It's expensive. Maybe you just needed a little cash flow." My throat tightened. "I would never—" "Vera, I'm your daughter-in-law. I'm carrying your grandchild. Callista's lip curled. Some people think a baby makes them family. It doesn't. Corbin entered then, phone in hand, expression unreadable. Let's not escalate, he said quietly. Let's give it a day. Maybe it'll turn up. Not a defense, not even hesitation. I looked at him, my husband, and something in me cracked, not loudly, but permanently. Later, I found our wedding photo missing from the hallway table. I asked no one, because I already knew. They were erasing me, one subtle move at a time. That night, as I finished loading the dishwasher, I stood at the sink and looked out into the dark yard, the reflection of myself faint in the window. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even surprised. I felt hollow. And then it hit me. That night, I didn't just lose their trust. I realized I'd never had it. I spent the rest of that night lying on my side, curled in the quiet ache of stillness, one hand tucked under my head, the other cradling the gentle rise of my belly. The soft kicks that came from within were slower now, fainter and less insistent, as if even my son could sense the chill in the air, the heavy stillness that had settled over the house like fog. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but filled with unspoken things, words left hanging in the spaces between doorways and sighs. Moonlight slanted through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the ceiling, shifting only as the minutes passed. I traced them with my eyes until my gaze blurred and my lids ached, but I couldn't sleep. Every breath I took felt like it echoed too loudly in the quiet. Even my heartbeat seemed out of place. Everything felt loud, intrusive, like my very presence had become a disruption. Morning came reluctantly, dragging sunlight into the kitchen like an afterthought. I moved on autopilot, boiling water, grinding beans, filling the pot. I made Corbin coffee, not out of habit or love, but because some small, desperate part of me was testing the waters, hoping that maybe a simple gesture, something that once was routine, could bridge the growing gap between us, that it might soften whatever wall had risen in him overnight. When he came downstairs, he didn't meet my eyes. His steps were slow, his face unreadable. He looked tired, but not tired from lack of sleep. Tired in that bone-deep way that comes from choosing distance over connection. From deciding, quietly and without consent, to stop trying. I handed him the mug. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer. Just took the coffee and sat across from me, his eyes glued to his phone screen. "I think we should talk," I said after a pause. "About last night. About the bracelet. About what your mom said. And what Callista—" He raised his eyes, slow and deliberate. "Don't escalate this, Adelise," he said. His tone wasn't angry, just cool, measured. "It's already messy. If you didn't take it, it'll show up. Just let it go." My mouth went dry. I forced myself to hold eye contact, to stay steady. "But you didn't say anything when they accused me." "You just stood there." "I didn't accuse you either," he said quickly, already looking away. "That's not the same, Corbin. That's not defending me." He pushed back from the table, took a long sip from his mug, and muttered, "It's not about blame. You're just making it worse." Then he walked out. No hug, no apology, not even a backward glance. He slept in the guest room that night. The following morning, I was still in my pajamas when Vera knocked once on the door, then opened it without waiting. Her voice was firm and clipped. "We're having a family check-in. Downstairs. Now." I followed her, wordless, to the living room. Corbin was already there, perched on the arm of the couch, scrolling through his phone like he wasn't fully present. Callista was on the love seat, a mimosa in hand, even though it wasn't yet 10 a.m. In another life, I might have raised an eyebrow. Now it barely registered. Vera stood by the fireplace with the poise of a woman used to command, used to issuing orders and having them followed without question. Her arms were crossed, her chin slightly raised. "I want to make something clear," she said, her voice tight with purpose. "This family has a name, a reputation, a legacy that spans generations, and lately, that reputation has been under unnecessary strain. Misunderstandings, tension, accusations." I opened my mouth to speak, but she held up a hand to silence me. "You don't contribute financially, Adelise. You don't work. You don't pay rent. You live here in a house that doesn't belong to you. You bake cookies and you take up space. And somehow, despite all of that, you always seem to be in the center of the drama. Callista took a lazy sip of her drink, then added, "No offense, but you walk around here like this is your house. It's awkward, really awkward." Corbin didn't look up from his phone. I stood there, not crying, not speaking, just breathing. My fingers curled into the sleeves of my oversized sweater as if I could anchor myself with my own grip. The room felt too bright, like every word spoken was a light glaring in my eyes. "If you want to be part of this family," Vera concluded, "you should start acting like someone who deserves to be." I gave a single nod. "Thank you for the clarity," I said quietly. Then I turned and left. I walked back up the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. In the bedroom, mine now, no longer ours, I closed the door behind me without slamming it. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared down at the floor, at the fibers in the carpet, the corner of the comforter brushing against my ankle. There were no tears, not even heartbreak. What I felt was colder than that. It was the realization that the life I had built, the love I thought was solid, had never been grounded in anything real. It had all been conditional, brittle, something that could be withdrawn without warning. Later that afternoon, I folded laundry. I paired socks, sorted towels, trying to convince myself that normalcy could still be maintained, that maybe it was all a misunderstanding that could be undone with time, with patience, with grace. When I walked into the master bathroom to grab my face cream, I noticed it immediately. My shelf was empty. My toothbrush? Gone. My face cream? Gone. Even my robe, the soft, ivory one Vera had gifted me during the wedding week with the family's monogram stitched above mine, was missing. I checked the cabinet. My shampoo had been replaced with another brand. The perfume I had saved up for and bought on sale had vanished. Confused, I walked to the guest bathroom and opened the cabinet there. All of it was crammed on a single shelf. Not folded neatly, not respectfully placed, just shoved in together like leftovers after an unwanted meal. No one had said anything. No note, no explanation, no conversation, just moved. Removed. I stood in front of that shelf for a full minute, staring at the misplaced pieces of myself. It was their house, I reminded myself. Their rules. But what hurt wasn't just that they had done it. It was that they didn't even feel the need to pretend I still mattered. That evening, I didn't speak. I moved through the rooms like a shadow, setting the table, checking the locks, brushing my teeth in the guest bathroom. Corbin didn't come home for dinner, didn't call, didn't text. The hours passed with only the ticking of the antique wall clock to mark them. At 11 p.m., I climbed into bed alone. I turned off the lamp and lay on my side again, one hand resting over the firm curve of my stomach. At 2 a.m., I heard the garage door. I didn't move, didn't ask where he'd been, didn't try to guess. I just stared at the ceiling again, letting the quiet wrap around me like a second skin. That was when it hit me, not as a flood, not as a crash, but as a slow, sinking truth. It was the first time I felt unmistakably, irrevocably pregnant. And completely alone. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The pillowcase was still damp from where I'd pressed my cheek into it, willing myself not to make a sound while Corbin stumbled in sometime around 2. He hadn't said a word, hadn't looked at me, just peeled off his jacket, kicked his shoes off like a teenager, and disappeared into the guest room without even brushing his teeth. The floor creaked behind him. I listened until it stopped. That Sunday started like every other Carter family Sunday, except I wasn't sure if I was still considered a Carter anymore. I got dressed in a plain navy dress that used to be one of Corbin's favorites. I didn't bother with makeup. There wasn't anyone left in that house who cared what I looked like. Still, I showed up to breakfast. It wasn't about keeping appearances, it was about showing myself I hadn't disappeared completely. When I stepped into the dining room, the table was already set. Vera was placing napkin rings, Callista was on her phone, and Corbin was stirring sugar into his coffee like nothing had happened. The table looked perfect, white linen, gold flatware, sparkling glasses. one name card at each setting. Except mine. I glanced around, pretending not to care, but I noticed it. The blank space beside Callista where I always sat now had no card, no plate, no seat even. Should I grab a chair? I asked, quietly. Vera didn't look up. Oh, just sit wherever. Your family, right? Callista snorted and didn't even bother hiding it. The room gave a ripple of polite laughter. One of Corbin's uncles raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I sat down at the very end of the table, in a spot usually left empty for serving dishes. I don't remember what was served that morning. Toast? Quiche? None of it stayed in my mouth long enough to register. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap and forced my lips into a smile every time someone glanced my way. After the meal, everyone moved into the living room for coffee and conversation. I excused myself to go upstairs, not because I had something to do, but because I needed to breathe. On the way up, I paused outside the hall closet. It was slightly ajar. Inside, on the top shelf, I noticed something odd. One of my teacups, the floral porcelain set my mother had gifted me when I got engaged, was sitting there. Later that afternoon, I went into the kitchen and found Callista sipping tea from the matching cup. "Oh, I found this in the guest cabinet," she said, shrugging. "You weren't using it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Even the dog had started ignoring me. Gatsby, the overfed family bulldog who used to curl at my feet every evening, now barely lifted his head when I entered the room. Last week, I'd reached for his leash to take him out, and Vera had gently taken it from my hand. "I've got it, dear," she said. "You've got enough to deal with." But I wasn't sure if that was kindness or another veiled dig. By Monday, something inside me cracked. Not from rage, but from clarity. I needed to check on my next prenatal appointment, so I called the OB's office. The receptionist paused after taking my name. I'm not seeing any active insurance on file under your name, Mrs. Carter." "That's impossible," I said, my stomach tightening. She double-checked. Then added, "It looks like the policyholder was switched to a Corbin Carter last week. You're still listed as a dependent, but limited coverage. I'd suggest confirming it with your insurer." I hung up and called the provider directly. After 30 minutes of waiting and being transferred twice, the woman on the other end said, "Yes, the plan was changed last Thursday. Only emergency services are now authorized for you." No prior notice, no consent, just gone. When Corbin got home that evening, I asked him calmly, "Did you change the insurance policy?" He didn't even flinch. "Yeah, it's just simpler that way." "Simpler for who?" He opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. "Don't make this into something it's not." I stared at him. "You stripped my access to care without even telling me." "I didn't strip anything." "You're still covered in emergencies." "Corbin," I said, voice steady, "I'm 8 months pregnant." He twisted the cap off the bottle and took a long sip before answering. "Then try not to have an emergency." The silence that followed was volcanic, and I stood there in it, surrounded by a man who no longer loved me enough to even lie. That night, I sat on the floor beside our bed, not our bed anymore, and opened my journal. I hadn't written in it since before we moved in with Vera, but the words came now. When did I stop being a wife and become an obstacle? I kept writing. The pressure in my abdomen pulsed, not painful yet, but noticeable. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline, from knowing that I was holding on to something that had already let go of me. Later, while looking for a heating pad in the bottom dresser drawer, I noticed something lying behind it. I reached down and pulled it out. Our wedding photo. It had been taken out of its frame. The glass was cracked and the picture was face down. I held it in my hands, stared at the two people smiling on the front porch of a house that never truly became mine. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted me forgotten. The photo slipped from my hands and hit the edge of the nightstand on its way down, the cracked glass clinking softly against the hardwood floor. I didn't move to pick it up. I just stared at it. Our wedding photo, our frozen smiles, the way my hand fit perfectly in Corbin's. It felt like looking at someone else's life. Someone else's lie. That was when I realized their silence wasn't neglect. It was strategy. I spent the next morning in a strange fog, floating from room to room like I was haunting the house instead of living in it. I wasn't angry, not yet, just alert. Every word, every glance, every closed door felt like a breadcrumb I had ignored too long. I had no proof, but instinct whispered louder than logic. And that whisper said, "This isn't just cruelty. This is a plan." Later that afternoon, I needed a moment out of the house. I grabbed my keys and drove to the grocery store. Not because we were out of food, but because I needed to be surrounded by something that didn't smell like manipulation. I was standing in the self-checkout line, a loaf of bread and some prenatal vitamins in my basket, when I spotted someone I recognized from a holiday event at the Carter house, a teenage girl who worked part-time at the local jeweler. Her name was Marin. I remembered that much. She noticed me too and smiled politely. "Oh, you're Corbin's wife, right?" I nodded. "Adelise." "Right. Vera's daughter-in-law. I saw your mother-in-law in the store last week," she said casually. "She brought in a bracelet to get cleaned and asked for a duplicate, said it was a family piece." My mouth didn't move. I felt my fingers tighten around the shopping basket handle. "A duplicate?" I asked, careful to sound curious, not shaken. "Yeah, kinda rare request, but people with heirlooms do it sometimes. Guess she wanted to wear one and keep one locked up. That's what she told my boss anyway." I managed a smile. That makes sense. But it didn't. It made everything make sense. The bracelet hadn't been stolen. It had been replicated. On purpose, so it could conveniently go missing. And I, the outsider, the poor girl who bakes cookies, was the perfect scapegoat. I drove straight from the store to the jewelry shop. I parked around the corner so Vera wouldn't see my car if she drove by. I didn't know what I expected, to be laughed at, turned away. But the moment I walked in and said her name, the manager nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Carter came in with that request a few days before the incident." "What did she say?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "She said she wanted an identical copy of her grandmother's bracelet, said she'd misplaced it once before, and didn't want to take any chances." "And she got both bracelets back?" He blinked. "She only picked up the original. We delivered the duplicate separately to her daughter's address. That was what she preferred." I thanked him, barely remembering how I got back to the car. My hands were shaking so hard, I dropped the keys twice trying to unlock the door. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, engine running, radio off, trying to breathe. It wasn't just that they didn't trust me. It wasn't just that they looked down on me. They were setting me up, purposefully, with planning and lies and a fake bracelet. And Corbin had either helped them or watched it happen and done nothing. Back at the house, no one noticed I'd been gone. Vera was in her garden, pruning hydrangeas like nothing had ever happened. Callista was lounging by the pool. Corbin wasn't home yet. I walked through the front door and froze. There, hanging on the hallway wall where our wedding portrait had once been, was a new family photo. It had been taken last winter at the neighborhood Christmas party. I remembered it well. I was in a red dress, standing on the far left. Corbin had his hand around my waist. Callista had insisted we all pose. But in this version, I wasn't there. My side had been cropped clean out. The frame sat perfectly centered. No sign that I had ever been a part of it. I stood staring at it for a long time. Not angry, not shocked, just hollow. That evening, I skipped dinner. I told Vera I wasn't feeling well, and she barely acknowledged me. I went upstairs, ran a warm bath, and sat in it until the water turned cold. Then I wrapped myself in a towel, sat on the bathroom floor, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked tired. Older. Not just from pregnancy, but from holding too much pain too quietly. I pressed both hands over my belly and whispered, "I don't think they ever planned to keep us." There was no answer, only the sound of water dripping from the faucet behind me. Later that night, I sat in bed, propped up by pillows, and opened my laptop. I typed the words slowly. How to document domestic gaslighting. The search results flooded in. Support groups, checklists, advice from therapists. Articles written by women who'd lived through being made to feel crazy for things that actually happened. I bookmarked 5 pages, emailed myself the links, and opened a new folder on my desktop. I labeled it Proof. If they wanted to make me invisible, I'd make sure the truth was undeniable. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had already drafted a folder on my desktop titled Proof. Inside it were screenshots, notes, timestamps, even a digital copy of the jewelry store receipt I'd managed to snap on my phone the day before. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't even angry in the way they probably expected. I was focused, cold. It wasn't personal anymore. It was survival. I woke up early, skipped breakfast, and spent an hour scanning through old text messages from Callista and Vera, things they'd said over the last year that now sounded different in the context I'd finally accepted. "You're lucky we took you in. Not every family would be so generous. We just want what's best for Corbin." Now I understood. What was best for Corbin, in their eyes, didn't include me. Around noon, Vera hosted one of her ladies' teas in the garden. I stayed upstairs most of the day, only coming down to grab a bottle of water. I heard their voices through the open French doors, clinking china, delicate laughter, the occasional forced compliment. I told myself I wouldn't get pulled into it, but as I walked past the stairwell, I heard my name. "She's been extra sensitive lately," one of the women said. Another replied, "Well, with all the tension lately, I suppose she feels watched." That was when I heard the laughter from upstairs. Loud, deliberate, Callista's laugh. I moved toward the sound, step by step, careful not to breathe too hard. They were in the master bedroom. When I reached the door, it was wide open. I stood frozen in the hallway. Callista was wearing my wedding dress, my actual gown, the ivory satin one I'd stored in a garment bag and tucked behind the linen closet, the same one I'd cried in the day after the ceremony, when Corbin and I had whispered to each other about someday having our own space. Callista was parading around in it like it was a joke. Her arms extended, twirling dramatically. "God, it's like a parade float," one woman laughed. Callista grinned. "Now this is what not to wear." I took a single step into the room, my shadow falling across the carpet. They turned. No one apologized. Vera, standing by the window with a teacup in hand, said, "Oh, come on, it's just a dress. You're so sensitive these days." My voice didn't work. Nothing came out. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't demand they take it off or give it back. I just turned around, walked down the hall, back into the guest room that had quietly become mine, and locked the door behind me. For the first time since I moved into that house, I turned the lock. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, reading the empty, curated lives of people who posted smiling family photos that probably hid the same rot under the surface. Then I saw the post. It was from Naomi, my oldest friend, the one who had been my maid of honor, the one who knew I was struggling, who had sat with me through the early weeks of my pregnancy. Her post was vague, but clear enough. Desperate people do desperate things. No context, no tag, but the diamond emoji was enough. Everyone who knew about Vera's bracelet would understand. I sent her a message. "Naomi, what's going on? Did something happen?" She never responded. What she did do was like Callista's comment on the post, a simple and a wink emoji. I closed the app and stared at the wall for what felt like an hour. My hands didn't tremble anymore. They clenched. Later that night, Corbin came home and walked straight past me in the kitchen. I followed him into the hallway and stood there, arms folded. "I need you to say something," I said. He sighed. "About what now?" "About what your sister did today. About Naomi's post. About this entire circus you've allowed to keep going." He kept walking. I followed. "If you don't say something now, you're going to lose me." He stopped, finally turning to face me. "You're being emotional. You're not seeing things clearly." That phrase, that same tired phrase, I'd heard it from him, from Vera, from Callista, from the women at the tea party. They all used it to mean the same thing. You're making us uncomfortable by naming the things we don't want to admit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said, "This is me seeing it clearer than ever." He shook his head and walked away. I stood there in the hallway, looking at the spot on the floor where I used to leave my shoes neatly lined up next to his. Then I went into the guest room, my room, and opened my laptop. I started a new email. Subject: Request for full medical file. I addressed it to my OB/GYN and typed the words carefully. Hi, Dr. Brenner. I'd like to request a complete copy of my prenatal records, including all appointment notes and lab results. Please send to my personal email. Thank you. I hovered over the send button. They wanted me powerless. I was about to show them how dangerous powerless could be. After clicking send on the email to Dr. Brenner, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the blinking cursor on the empty desktop. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe but tightens something behind your ribs. I wasn't waiting for a reply. I was anchoring myself. I needed to remember this moment, the moment I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. My silence had protected them long enough, and now I was done protecting people who were sharpening their knives behind my back. I transferred every document I had, text messages, medical bills, screenshots of comments, the photo of the cropped family portrait, into a cloud folder labeled Evidence, Final. It wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. If anything happened to me or my baby, I needed people to know it wasn't an accident. It was the slow kind of erosion that people excuse until it's too late. Next, I downloaded a voice memo app and started recording snippets whenever someone spoke to me with that half-smile, half-threat tone they'd all perfected. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew one thing: I wouldn't walk blind anymore. By mid-afternoon, the air felt heavier. Spokane spring air can be unpredictable, but this was something else. I felt off, tender in my back, a tightening across my belly that came and went in waves. It wasn't painful exactly, but it made me pause. Still, I continued packing my hospital bag. I'd been putting it off, telling myself I had time, but now, something in my body told me otherwise. I folded 2 onesies, a burp cloth, and a blanket with soft gray stars. I hesitated before adding my favorite robe. It no longer smelled like home, but I needed something that still felt like mine. I called out from the hallway, "Corbin?" He was downstairs, probably in the den again. I made my way slowly down the stairs and into the kitchen, where he was perched on a bar stool scrolling through his phone. "I'm feeling some pressure," I said, tightening in my back. "It might be Braxton Hicks, but it feels stronger than usual." Without looking up, he muttered, "Drink water." "You're probably just stressed." Callista, lounging nearby with a matcha latte, chimed in. "She's always dramatic when she doesn't get enough attention." Vera appeared in the doorway behind them, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You can't use a baby to avoid accountability forever." My hand instinctively went to my belly. The baby kicked. A strong, definite nudge, like he was reminding me he was listening too. "I think I need to go to the hospital," I said firmly. Corbin finally looked up. "Right now?" "Yes." Vera moved first. "Then I'll come with you. We should all go. She might try to spin a story again." "No," I said, holding her gaze. "I just want Corbin with me." "That's not your decision," she snapped. Corbin stood, rubbing his forehead like I'd given him a headache. "Let's just all go. That way no one says anything happened behind closed doors." So that was the plan now, to frame it like I was the one twisting facts. Back upstairs, I packed the final items into my overnight bag. While folding a pair of socks, I remembered the flash drive I'd left charging behind the nightstand. I plugged it into my laptop, double-checked the backups, then slipped it into a small zipper pocket inside my purse. If I was walking into a trap, I wasn't going empty-handed. I zipped the bag closed, threw on a loose cardigan, and made my way back down. We left around 5:30 p.m. The sky was overcast, and the wind had picked up. It wasn't raining yet, but the clouds threatened it. I climbed into the passenger seat. Corbin took the wheel. Vera and Callista got into the back like they were headed to a dinner party. The car ride started in silence. Corbin's jaw was tight, one hand gripping the wheel too hard. My breathing came in slow, shallow counts as I timed the cramps. 7 minutes apart, then 6, then 5. I looked at him. They're getting closer. Just hang in there, he said flatly. I didn't answer. My fingers curled around my seatbelt as another wave hit me. I gritted my teeth. The baby shifted. Then, just as we passed a dark stretch of highway lined with pine trees, Vera spoke. Maybe now is a good time to admit it, Adelise, before you give birth to a lie. My head turned so fast I felt a sharp pinch in my neck. What did you say? You know exactly what I said, she continued. If you don't confess, we'll go to the police instead of the hospital. Callista leaned forward. It's not like you haven't had the chance to come clean. You've been skimming off this family for months. I turned to Corbin. You're going to let them say this to me while I'm in labor? He didn't look at me, just stared ahead, knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. I didn't steal anything, I said, voice trembling but clear. And if you don't get me to the hospital— What? Callista cut in. You'll fake another crisis? Call your little sister to bail you out again? That was it, the last straw, the final slap in a long line of them. Another contraction hit, stronger, longer. I doubled forward, gripping the edge of the seat. That's when I knew. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. The contraction passed, and I tried to sit upright again. The pain in my back had started to pulse harder, meaner, like my body was signaling that it was done waiting. We were less than 10 minutes from the hospital, but the road around us stretched empty. Pine trees stood like silent witnesses along the shoulder. Corbin drove like a man being forced to keep his hands on the wheel. Vera muttered something in the back seat. Callista was still scrolling her phone. And then, he pulled over. No signal, no warning, just a sudden jolt to the right, the tires crackling against gravel. What are you doing? I asked, my voice brittle. Corbin turned the engine off. He exhaled slowly like he'd just finished a meeting, then unbuckled his seatbelt. Vera leaned forward. This is for the best. I felt the blood drain from my face. Corbin stepped out and walked around to my side. I kept the door locked, gripping my purse like a shield. He tapped on the window, expressionless. Open the door. No. He sighed and pulled out his own key fob. With a click, the locks popped. The door swung open, and cold air rushed in. I grabbed the side of the seat. You're not coming back to our house, he said, voice calm, almost bored. I'm in labor, I said, my breath coming quicker now. I need a hospital. You should have thought about that before you tried to tear our family apart. Vera's voice snapped from behind him. You think this baby makes you family? You've manipulated Corbin since day one. You lied. You stole. And now you want sympathy? Callista added. If she doesn't get out, I'm calling the police. And when they find the bracelet pawned in her name— I couldn't listen. I doubled over again, this time the pain shooting down my legs. Corbin, please. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Then he reached in, grabbed my elbow, not harshly, but firm enough, and pulled me up. My feet hit the uneven gravel, the sky above blurred. My knees buckled. I hit the ground hard, the shock of the impact shuddering through my body. And then, I felt it. A pop. Warmth flooding between my legs. My water had broken. I gasped, hands going to my stomach. They didn't wait. The car door slammed shut behind me. Tires spun on loose rock. The taillights flickered once, and then they were gone. The road around me stretched into the dusk, silent and endless. I was soaked, shaking. My baby was coming, and I was alone. I tried to reach for my phone, then remembered it was in the car, along with my hospital bag, my ID, everything. I tried calling out. Nothing came. I was winded, afraid to breathe too deep. Somewhere behind me, a car passed on the opposite side of the highway, too far, too fast. I moved, dragging myself toward the edge of the road where the gravel met dirt. My shoes slipped off. My palms scraped across the rocks. My teeth clenched through another contraction. Then something fell from my purse, a piece of folded paper, half soaked. I recognized it immediately. The letter I'd written to Vera, tucked into her gift the week after our wedding. Thank you for welcoming me, for letting me be part of your family. I promise to honor Corbin, to be patient, to earn your trust. It was torn, smudged with dirt. One corner bore the imprint of a stiletto heel. I stared at it, blinking hard. That letter had been saved, moved, stepped on, just like me. Another contraction, sharper this time. I curled on my side, knees tucked in, my body trying to shield my baby from the cold. I whispered his name, though I hadn't said it out loud yet, just in case no one found me in time. I wanted someone to know I had named him. Time blurred. The sky above shifted into early twilight, that soft blue hour when shadows lengthen and headlights start to glow. And then, salvation. A pair of beams rounded the corner and slowed. A truck, a rusty red pickup, the kind that didn't belong in a gated community. It stopped. The engine rumbled, then turned off. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out, gray curls tied back, a lined face sharp with alarm. "Oh my God," she said, hurrying toward me. "Are you okay? Are you?" I nodded once. Couldn't speak. She knelt beside me. "You're in labor. How far apart are the contractions?" I tried to answer. Couldn't. "It's okay. I've got you," she said, slipping off her coat and wrapping it around me. She reached into her truck for a phone and dialed 911. I heard her give the mile marker, her voice steady. "She's going into labor. Alone. She was left here. Yes, left. She's in shock. Hurry." She stayed with me, one hand on my shoulder, the other holding mine. "Name's Lenora," she said. "You just squeeze when it hurts." I don't remember how long it took for the ambulance to arrive. But Lenora didn't leave. As the flashing lights bathed the trees, I reached for her hand again and whispered, "Please don't leave me." She squeezed back. And for the first time in hours, someone said it back, "I won't." The back of the ambulance was too bright, too sterile, but the warmth of Lenora's hand in mine grounded me more than any blanket they wrapped around me. As the EMTs worked quickly, checking vitals and prepping IVs, I could barely register the questions being thrown my way. All I knew was that my son was still moving, and I was still here. By the time we arrived at the hospital, the contractions were steady and forceful. The ER team met us at the entrance. One nurse stayed beside me while the others wheeled me into labor and delivery. Lenora tried to follow, but they gently stopped her at the doors. "I'll be right here when you come out," she promised. "You're not alone." Those words echoed in my chest as they wheeled me down the hallway. My labor didn't last much longer. Within 2 hours, they had me prepped for an emergency C-section. My blood pressure had dropped. The baby was in distress, but I was calm. Calm in a way that scared even me. I remember the soft beep of monitors, the overhead lights blurring into halos, and the anesthesiologist's voice saying, "You're doing great, Mom. Almost there." Then, his cry. That tiny, raw, sharp sound, like hope being pulled back into the room. They let me see him for just a moment before whisking him to the NICU for observation. He was beautiful, all cheeks and curls and defiance. My son had survived everything. So had I. A few hours later, I woke up in recovery with an IV in my arm and my mother sitting quietly beside me. Her face looked older somehow, etched with worry and rage she hadn't voiced yet. "You're safe," she said. Talia was in the corner, holding a paper bag of food and a folder in her lap. She rose when she saw me open my eyes. "You don't have to say anything," she said, walking over. "I already know." That evening, while the baby rested in the NICU and my mother went home to shower, Thalia stayed with me. We pieced everything together. The nurse had documented the bruises. They took photographs. There was a note in my file. Patient reports physical expulsion from vehicle while in active labor. It wasn't just a statement, it was evidence. Thalia began collecting more. She contacted the clinic for appointment logs and pulled medical bills from my email. She filed them all into a new folder labeled Case. Corbin never came to the hospital. Not once. No calls, no texts, not even a message through Vera. The silence wasn't just cruel, it was tactical. He knew what he'd done, and staying away was the cleanest way to distance himself. 2 days later, Thalia walked into my room holding a USB drive and a printed image. "Remember the bakery you used to deliver to on Wednesdays?" she asked. I nodded. "Heirloom Cafe?" They still have exterior cameras. You were there the morning the bracelet went missing. You're in the footage, wearing your wedding ring, delivering a tray of lemon bars. She handed me a still frame, me, holding a box, time-stamped, standing at the bakery's back door. That's not all, she added. The footage proves you never came near the Carter house that day, which means their entire accusation timeline falls apart. We sat in silence for a while. Then I said, "Let's talk to a lawyer." I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted protection. And I wanted consequences. With Lenora's statement from the scene, the medical documentation, and now the footage, what I had was more than a case. I had truth. By the end of the week, I retained Claire Winters, a local attorney known for her work with survivors of domestic abuse. When I met with her, she didn't ask me to start at the beginning. She said, "Tell me what you want out of this." "Safety," I said, "and full custody, and I don't want them near my son." Claire nodded. "We'll file for divorce, sole custody, and press charges, domestic battery, emotional abuse, and medical endangerment. We have grounds for all of it." She filed the paperwork that afternoon. Corbin was served 2 days later at his office. Vera tried to call my mother, asking if we could keep things private. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that Corbin had panicked, that it was a family matter. We didn't answer. When I was discharged from the hospital, I strapped my son, Eli, into the car seat for the first time. This time, I wasn't getting into Corbin's car. I wasn't sitting next to Vera or Callista. I wasn't letting anyone else control the wheel. Thalia stood beside me, keys in hand, opening the passenger door. The ride home was quiet, peaceful, no accusations, no manipulation, just the hum of the tires on pavement and the soft breathing of a newborn in the back seat. We pulled into my parents' driveway. The porch light was on. My father stood on the steps, hands in his pockets, waiting. Before we got out, I looked back at the hospital in the distance. I didn't feel broken anymore. They tried to erase me, but I kept the receipts. It had been 4 months since I'd left that hospital room with my son in my arms and the truth in my back pocket. 4 months of depositions, affidavits, and legal motions. 4 months of facing everything I had once been too afraid to name. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a navy blue blouse and flat shoes. Nothing fancy, just strong. Thalia was already waiting in the driveway with the car seat installed. My mother sat beside her, holding a thermos of tea like a security blanket. Eli had just turned 12 weeks old, and he slept through most car rides. This one was no different. The courthouse wasn't unfamiliar. I had been there twice already for preliminary statements, but this time it was final. The room was smaller than I expected, quieter than I'd imagined. The judge was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a voice that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. When our case was called, I stood. Claire, my attorney, placed a comforting hand on my back as we walked to the center. Corbin was already seated at the opposite table. He didn't look at me, neither did Vera. She sat behind him, face drawn tight, the way people look when they're losing control but trying to pretend it's not happening. Callista wasn't there. According to Claire, she'd removed herself from the narrative once the media caught wind of the accusations, and her name had started trending for all the wrong reasons. Claire presented the evidence plainly, without theatrics. The medical report from the ER, the bruises documented by hospital staff, the dashcam video from Lenora's truck, the bakery surveillance that placed me miles away during the alleged theft, and Lenora's sworn statement. When it was my turn to speak, I stood with my palms flat on the table. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said, "but I won't let my son grow up thinking silence is strength. I won't let him believe manipulation is love. I came into that house with nothing but good intentions, and I was erased for it." The judge took a breath, then read the ruling. Corbin, found guilty of domestic endangerment and willful abandonment. 3 years of probation with mandatory counseling and no visitation rights until re-evaluated by family court. No contact with Eli or me without a court-appointed supervisor. Vera, fined for defamation and obstruction. Court ordered to perform 240 hours of community service at a domestic violence shelter. Callista, not criminally charged, but her PR contracts and endorsements had been revoked within weeks of the story breaking. One of her former clients called her an image risk. I didn't cheer, I didn't gloat, I didn't even smile. As we walked past Vera, she didn't say a word. Her face was pale, unmoving. For a second, I wondered if she'd finally understood what she'd done. But then I realized, people like Vera don't change. They just get quieter when the audience leaves. I turned to her and said, "You didn't break me, but you did teach me who I never want to become." We walked out into the afternoon sun. It was warmer than I expected for October. 6 months later, I opened my bakery. We called it Eli's Oven. It wasn't much. A small storefront tucked into the corner of a modest strip mall. Pastel walls, wooden shelves filled with fresh bread and butter cookies. A bell on the door that jingled whenever someone walked in. I baked early mornings while my mother looked after Eli. Thalia helped with the website and delivery logistics. Lenora came by every Friday with her gardening gloves still on and a box of coffee for the staff. She didn't say much, but her presence was a silent promise that not all strangers are dangerous, and some turn out to be your strongest allies. On the counter near the register sat a framed note card that read, "From our family, with strength." We didn't take shortcuts. We didn't take clients who disrespected our staff. We didn't need to be the best bakery in Spokane. We just needed to be a place that held warmth. One night, after closing, I rocked Eli in my arms. He was getting heavier by the day, his cheeks round, his eyes wide and curious. He looked up at me like I held the world. "We made it," I whispered. He blinked. That night, I didn't dream about courtrooms or cold highways or hospital beds. I dreamed about cinnamon, about vanilla, about the steady rhythm of batter being poured into pans and the sound of Eli's tiny breath against my chest. I hadn't forgiven Corbin. I didn't expect to. But I no longer needed him to acknowledge my pain. The court had. My family had. I had. Weeks later, on a drive home from a delivery, I turned onto the road where it had happened, the place they'd left me. I hadn't been back since. I slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder. The gravel hadn't changed. The trees were still thick and tall. But the cold I remembered wasn't there. In its place was something softer, closure. Eli stirred in the back seat. "That's where they left us," I said aloud, not needing him to understand, only to hear. And I paused, then pulled back onto the road. But look where we are now. Some bruises don't fade, but they do teach you how to fight with love. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. But healing begins the moment we stop staying silent and start standing up for the truth. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in your own family? Or pushed aside when you needed someone most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that speak to the heart.